Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents An Enchantment of Thorns, a Fey Beauty and the Beast retelling by Helena Rookwood and Elm Vince, narrated by Lucy Brownhill. Sometimes I feel wild, so wild that my voice is the brush of wind through petals. My hands are curling leaves, my feet are roots, and my heart is a tangle of thorns. Chapter 1. The Folkwood loomed before us, a dark tangle of gnarled trees, winding ivy and velvet mosses. Beside me, my eldest sister clutched her bow, lilac eyes narrowed as she squinted into the misty depths of the forest. Laurel held her lean body as taut as her weapon, poised and ready to fire one of her iron-tipped arrows at the first shimmer of pixie dust or flutter of a translucent wing. My hand hovered over the string of dried rowan berries around my neck, rolling the vibrant beads between my thumb and fingertips, my gaze darting between the branches for the glittering eyes of an imp or sprite, or worse, that might be watching us from the trees. It was rare that I was called out right to the forest's edge, uncomfortably close to the Fey territory within, and you couldn't trust the Fey or the Folkwood. I dropped my hand from my necklace to my satchel, wondering whether I'd brought enough supplies with me to hold back the encroaching trees and undergrowth. They'd already spread much farther onto the farmland than I'd expected. With spring rapidly approaching, the threat from the Folkwood should be getting better, not worse. Farmer Barrick Hawley shifted behind us, his weathered cheeks reddening, as he watched the two of us take in the impenetrable wall of brambles and branches, sticky buds like tiny green tongues, tasting the clear farmland air beyond the trees he should have been making sure were kept back. I repressed the urge to glare at him as he began fidgeting with the flat cap he held in his hands. Farmer Hawley flinched as I turned back to him, launching into a defence even before I'd spoken.
"It's been even worse than usual this winter, Aster," he said quickly. "More little folk meddling on the farm. I've been finding whole pails of milk gone sour, lines of winter cabbages rotting in the ground, and I've lost half our pigs. They keep wandering into the wood."
He scrubbed the back of his hand over the sweat beading on his brow.
"It's been hard to find time to keep a check on the tree line."
My lips pinched together. Securing the border between the Folkwood and Rosehill was more important than anything else Farmer Hawley had to do on the farm. Not to mention, he hadn't said a word to us about pigs disappearing into the forest over the winter. That was concerning. The Folkwood was always at its wildest during winter, and we had to stay especially vigilant. I made a mental note to ask around and find out whether any others who lived on the outer edges of Rosehill had seen any livestock go missing. Pressing down the swell of irritation in my stomach, I addressed Farmer Hawley in a calm, authoritative voice. "Why now?" The farmer blinked.
"Sorry?"
"You said this has been going on all winter." I scuffed the heel of my boot over the rich earth, kicking up a cloud of chocolate-coloured dust and allowing my anger to disperse with it on the breeze. "Why call us out now?" A shadow flickered over the farmer's strained expression.
It's my wife, Ellis."
His eyes closed briefly.
"The children say they've seen her in the forest. Nairn almost went in after her."
My hand flew to my chest, a wave of dizziness washing over me. Beside me, my sister clicked her tongue, her brow pinching into a frown as she lowered her arrow a fraction.
"Your wife should know better."
"Laurel," I interrupted quickly. "Ellis died last fall." Laurel's grip on her bow instantly tightened again, and she lifted the arrow so it pointed into the dark of the wood. My heart fluttered fast and loose, my mouth drying as I peered in the direction of her arrow. The puka. Of all the Fey we could have discovered at the edge of the Folkwood, this particular shape-shifting Fey was the worst of all. It had stalked the borders of the town for years, And it was cunning. But we hadn't crossed paths in a while now. I swallowed the lump in my throat.
I'm sorry, Aster,
Farmer Hawley mumbled, twisting his cap even more tightly between his palms.
I know that you—
It's fine, I said, my voice just a little too high-pitched. Casting my eyes down, I began rifling through my satchel, my fingers grazing rough burlap pouches of salt, smooth paper packet of seeds, and the sharp, cold edge of a trowel. I cleared my throat, hiding the worry from my next words. We just need to make sure the tree line is secure, so the Folkwood doesn't expand any farther, and then go over what you already have, warding off fey magic. It might need strengthening. I strode a few paces along the tree line, my gaze running over roots tangled with the weeds Farmer Hawley had allowed to grow right up to the forest, blurring the line between where the trees ended and the farm began. The trees had even begun creeping over the ditch in places. You'll need to clear this back. I gestured to the overgrown ditch. Burn what's in it, then dig a fresh line around where the trees have grown onto your land. Then I'd recommend putting down a mulch to slow the weed growth over the spring. Although you'll still need to spend some time out here pulling up anything while it's small. I spun on my heel, walking back toward Laurel and Farmer Hawley. Where the ditch looked relatively clear of tree roots, I slid down into it, the rich scent of disturbed earth rising into the air. Crouching down, I parted the wash of weeds with my hands, looking for any sign of the fey wards laid here by the last greenwitch to serve the town, my former mentor. A pang shuddered through me at the thought of Sage and what had happened between her and the puka, but I pressed the memory firmly down, working my hands faster through the tangled weeds. There was no room for emotion in the work of a greenwitch. Sage had taught me that, and when I'd forgotten, she'd paid for it. My fingers met with a frayed line of red thread, exactly what I'd been looking for. Running my fingers along it, I found it damp with dew, completely disintegrated in places. My lips thinned. Thread wasn't a permanent line of defence, but it would have lasted a lot longer if it had been kept clear of the weeds. I looked up, preparing to deliver another lecture, but found Farmer Hawley staring unhappily along the line of the ditch. What? It was an effort to keep the exasperation from creeping into my voice. He instantly dropped his gaze back to the cap in his hands.
I'd hoped. I mean, I wondered whether we might be able to take back some of what's been lost. Cut back some of the overgrowth, maybe.
I stifled a dark laugh. Cut back the Folkwood. If only it was so simple. I might have a gift with things that grew, be as versed in fey customs as it was possible to be in our isolated little town in the middle of the forest, but even I couldn't fight ancient fey magic. No human could. There was a reason Rosehill had no woodcutters. I'll bring some St. John's wort cuttings later this morning, I said briskly, ignoring the farmer's foolish question. We'll plant a line of it ahead of the ditches. The ditches will still need to be kept clear, I added, when Farmer Hawley's expression turned hopeful at the promise of less work. But if the puka shows its face again, it should stop the children thinking it's their mother. For now, we'll just—
Aster!
Laurel's sharp tone sounded a moment before her footsteps pounded over the earth, her hand grabbing the collar of my blouse, my throat constricting as my windpipe was momentarily crushed. She yanked me up and out of the ditch, my knees banging against the side, the soft earth crumbling at the impact. I didn't pause. Head pounding, fingers raking through the earth, I pushed myself back to my feet and whirled to face the Folkwood. The dizzy feeling washed over me again. It's here. The familiar face of Farmer Hawley's wife, Ellis, stared out from between the trees. A line of worry creased the brow of her warm, brown face, and as she reached up to tuck a strand of grey-streaked hair behind her ear, it was hard to believe she hadn't just wandered off into the forest instead of falling victim to a fever last fall. She pressed her hand to her heart, fixing wounded eyes upon Barik. The farmer's face paled. Laurel's soft breeches brushed against me as she sped along the tree line, training her arrow on the ghostly figure,
Laurel!
I grabbed at her as she passed. But my sister was a trained hunter, and I was not. My fingers met with nothing, and even before the words had left my lips, she'd already fired the arrow, its iron tip cutting the air with a high whistle. As she fired, Ellis moved, faster than was humanly possible, a dark blur between the trees, easily dodging Laurel's arrow. The arrow thudded into a tree, and a scream rose from the folkwood as the iron poison seeped into the trunk. I winced. A shock of birds flapping into the air as the plaintive shriek pierced the quiet, the sound of wood catching in a fire, wind pressing through a cracked window. I repressed a shudder as the noise reverberated down my spine. I hope Laurel doesn't pay for that later. As the scream died away, Ellis stared at the arrow quivering in the tree, then slowly turned back to us. Her soft face broke into a wicked smile, and there was something wolfish about it, a point of sharp teeth, a yellowing of the eyes. She took a step towards us, like she was stalking prey. I swallowed hard, running a hand over my hair, the dark waves contained within a neat braid. It can't hurt us, not unless we cross the tree line. "It's okay," I said, trying hard to keep my voice steady. "The puka can't reach us here. It's just trying to lure us into the forest." I shot a nervous glance at Farmer Hawley, who stared at the imitation of his wife with an anguished expression. "Come on, Aster. Don't let your emotions take over. One of us has to keep a level head." Ignoring my increasingly damp palms, I reached back into my satchel, fumbling for the bundle of dried rowan stems, daisies, and rosemary that I always kept close at hand to ward off fey enchantments. My fingers curled around it, and a sense of calm flowed back into me. "Farmer Hawley," I said, still in a steady tone, "have you got a light?" The farmer's gaze snapped away from his wife, bewilderment stamped across his face. He didn't answer, his head turning slowly back toward the trees. "Barik, a light!" I thrust the bundle of herbs toward him.
Of course."
Farmer Hawley reached into the pocket of his heavy coat, withdrawing a box of matches. He hesitated, staring at the plants bound tightly in white thread. I waved the bundle closer to his nose. "Quickly!" Farmer Hawley struck the match, a dull hiss sounding before the little golden flame jumped to life. He held it to the end of the herbs, and I watched, waiting for the end to catch before gently blowing out the flame again, leaving the tiniest flicker of embers at the bundle's tip. It was enough. Smoke billowed from the end of the bundle, heavy with the protective properties of the plants, and I advanced on the forest, waving the smouldering herbs before me. Ellis let out a hiss, taking a step back from the tree line. I stopped with only the overgrown ditch between us, holding out the bundle of herbs like it was a weapon. The smoke curled and caught in the spring breeze, wafting painfully slowly into the forest. But I could wait. I wasn't going to be lured into putting a foot in the shadow of the trees. Ellis let out another hiss as the smoke drifted closer, gently stroking her skin. The illusion shuddered, blurring at the edges, like leaves shaken down from trees, pencil lines drawn and rubbed out again. For a moment, we glimpsed the Fae wearing Ellis's shape. Fear skittered down my spine at the glint of yellow eyes, the curve of sharp fangs, the sweep of dark, rough fur. Then it fled, turning with inhuman speed and bolting back into the forest. Farmer Hawley took a quick step forward, and I thrust out the arm holding the smoking herbs, keeping him back. "It's not her," I said gently. "Don't let it use her against you." I felt him go taut against my arm, the physical effort of holding his emotion in check. I knew a thing or two about that. Dropping my arm, I stepped back, levelling my voice again. "That ought to keep it away for a while, now that it knows you've seen its true form. I'll be back later today with the St. John's ward, and, Barik," I turned to him with my sternest expression, "you must keep the tree line back. You might feel far removed from the town out here, but everyone in Rosehill depends on you to keep the borders safe. Your children depend on you." He nodded mutely, but continued staring into the depths of the Folkwood, at the dark and the mist that had swallowed the ghostly imitation of his wife. Uneasily, I retreated a few steps, turning to head back to the centre of town, to the little garden where I grew the plants and flowers needed to keep our small town safe. I would bring back the St. John's wort later in the week, when the pain of seeing Ellis had faded, leaving Barik better able to discuss what needed to be done about the tree line. I chewed on my lip. Even now, after seeing the puka for what it really was, the farmer didn't seem entirely convinced that he ought to start weeding straight away. Laurel slung her bow over her shoulder, shooting one last look back at the Folkwood before running a few steps to join me at my side. She nudged me with her elbow.
"Seeing you today, I almost think I should have taken up gardening instead of archery."
I made a scoffing sound. "You haven't the patience. You've never lasted longer than a morning when you've come to help me with weeding." Laurel gave a loud, easy laugh, at odds with the tension still hanging in the wake of the puka's flight back into the forest.
"I'm serious, Aster. I hope Rosehill appreciates what a talented greenwitch we have to look after us."
Warmth rose in my cheeks. I was grateful for my sister's words. After everything that had happened with Sage, I'd worked hard to take over as the town's greenwitch, and it wasn't a position I treated lightly. I wanted to make my former mentor proud. My sister's tone turned mocking.
"The beast should beware if he chooses you at the tithe this week. What with your arsenal of plants."
I stopped abruptly, my shoulders tightening. Dealing with the puka, I'd almost forgotten. Almost. I shot Laurel a reproachful look, and she offered me a small shrug in return.
"I'm joking. You know I'm joking."
I didn't see what there was to joke about, though. No matter what I did with my plants, when the tithe came around, the beast would take one of us. Chapter 2. I leaned uncomfortably against the doorframe as Ava teased out the floating skirts of her dress, ready on its hanger for tomorrow, the white layers billowing out like petals on the wind as she ruffled and smoothed out the fabric. Fine lines of clever embroidery and shining thread laced each layer of white material, so that the skirts glimmered in the pale, low-slung light streaming in through the tall windows. Tiny pearls studded the bodice, rattling against the mirrors on the front of the shining wooden closet. It was, of course, an outrageously extravagant design. Nothing less than the best for my beautiful middle sister. I bit down hard on my lip, forcing back the words threatening on the tip of my tongue. With all its finery, this could have been a wedding dress. It hardly seemed suitable to wear to the tithe tomorrow, when the beast would steal away one of the white-clad girls turning 18 this year. My heart gave a painful stab. If Ava went to the tithe wearing this dress, the beast wouldn't have eyes for anyone else. Running her hand down the skirts one final time, Ava turned back to face me, her lilac eyes luminous against her dark skin as they caught the late afternoon light. That was the one thing we three half-sisters had in common, in spite of 3 different mothers and 3 very different personalities, the striking lilac eyes we'd all inherited from our father. But while my eyes were the feature I was proudest of, with Ava, it was hard to pick her best feature. She was by far the fairest of the 3 of us, if not the fairest girl in all of Rosehill. Another reason to question her choice of dress for tomorrow. She would already stand out from the rest of us, a rose among thorns. My sister's finely arched brows lowered, her full lips pressed into a thin line as she realised I still hovered in the doorway. "Aren't you going to come in?" Hands on hips, she tossed her shining corkscrew curls over her shoulder. "I suppose it's too much to ask that you might deign to sit down." Reluctantly, I slipped inside the room, glancing between the seat closest to Ava, an ornately carved, polished chair at her dressing table, and a sofa laden with plump cushions beside a fireplace on the far side of the room. I never felt comfortable visiting Ava. Inside the town walls that encircled the central, richest part of town, my sister's home was a world away from the lonely farm I'd just left after returning with the promised St. John's Walk cuttings for Farmer Hawley. A world away from my own home, even, which, while also situated inside the town walls, was incomparable to the luxury of the mansion house Ava had grown up in. Of course, Ava's mother was a lady. Mine had been her maid. Each time I visited, I passed servants tittering in the hallway, and I ignored hushed whispers that Ava's half-sister, Kalina's girl, had come calling. I tried my hardest not to listen when I heard them saying how unhappy it must make Lady Cicely that her daughter chose to have any kind of relationship with the half-sister who was such a painful reminder of my father's scandalous affairs with both the lady and her maid in the same year. "Here, Aster!" Ava beckoned me over to the dressing table, gliding over and resting one slender hand upon the back of the chair beside it. I moved closer, breathing in a heady, floral fragrance. Roses. Leaves and discarded stems littered the tabletop. A pair of shining silver scissors had been left with the blades open, a ball of twine beside them. In the very centre of it all, a neat circlet of pale pink roses sat upon a damp cloth, keeping them fresh for tomorrow. Ava frowned down at the flowers, her freckled nose wrinkling. "I thought about violets, because Mamma said they would bring out my eyes. But there's just something so romantic about roses." She shot me a disgruntled look. "I suppose you haven't even thought about what flowers you'll wear tomorrow?" I bit back the sharp words on the tip of my tongue. Of course, Ava didn't exactly have a choice about the flower crown. Along with the white dresses, it was required that girls wore them to the tithe, woven with a flower of their choosing. But why did Ava want flowers that were romantic? I was used to keeping a tight lid on my emotions for my work as a greenwitch, but spending time with Ava was always an exercise in restraint. If I didn't hold my tongue, we'd spend almost all our time bickering. I cleared my throat, feeling compelled to say something. "Ava," I began cautiously, "about tomorrow, this dress you've chosen, why are you avoiding my question?" Ava interrupted, crossing her arms. Her eyes narrowed. "Have you picked roses too?" One hand moved to hover over the perfect flower crown, as though ready to rip out every petal if there were any risk I had picked the same flower. "Of course not," I spluttered. "Roses are for love. Why would I wear a flower for love to greet the beast?" I drew a breath, steadying my voice. "Which is exactly why I'm worried about you wearing them, Ava. You're already the fairest girl in Rosehill. You don't need roses." Ava's expression instantly softened, her hand dropping back to her side. "Don't be silly, Aster," she protested, even as she glanced over at her reflection in the mirrored closet, angling her face so that the light caught the shimmer she had painted over her high cheekbones. "There are going to be 12 girls there tomorrow. There's no guarantee the beast will pick me." Something about the way she worded this made me tense. "I'd hope you wouldn't want a guarantee," I said slowly. "But the beast almost always chooses the prettiest girl." Ava cast her gaze down, her long black lashes grazing her cheeks, but her lips tugged up into a smile. "I'm sure I'm not the prettiest, Aster, but I hope the beast likes roses. I suppose the flowers must mean something to him, mustn't they? Otherwise, why would we be expected to choose them ourselves?" Heat prickled up my neck at my sister's outlandish words, my jaw working. I hope the beast likes roses. She should be hoping he loathed them.
"Miss Aveline?"
Ava turned to a maid hovering in the doorway. The servant's eyes darted briefly to me before she dipped into a curtsy and announced politely,
"Your other guests are here."
Other guests? For a moment I almost forgot my concern at my sister's words. "Oh, good!" Ava clapped her hands together. "Send them through here. They'll want to see my new dress. And have the kitchen send up something to drink, won't you? Something sparkling if they can manage it." She flitted back to the flowing white dress hanging on the door of her closet, once again fluffing her hands underneath the skirts to make them more buoyant. I tried my hardest to keep the urgency from my voice, but it was difficult when my sister was being quite so ridiculous about all of this. Why was it that in spite of being the youngest sister, I so often felt like the eldest? "I'm serious, Ava." I drew a finger through the leaves on the table, wincing as a thorn snagged on my skin. "The dress, the crown of roses. You'd be better off choosing something as plain as possible." "Aveline!" A shriek from the doorway cut me off mid-sentence. "That's the dress you're wearing tomorrow. The rest of us won't stand a chance." A slender girl with pale blonde hair bolted into the room, almost writhing with excitement at the sight of Ava's dress. Ava smiled coyly, stepping aside so her friend could get the full effect of the dress. "Do you like it?" "Oh, Aline had seen it first," came a plaintive wail from the door. More of Ava's friends, two girls called Daisy and Marcia, hurried in, hands pressed to their chests, their eyes widening as they took in the beautiful white dress.
"Oh, Aveline," Marcia sighed. "You look like a princess."
I stuck my bleeding finger in my mouth, brows lowered. Couldn't they see that was exactly the problem? "A fey princess," Ava corrected. A smile split her face. "Or as close as a human can come to looking like one, anyway." "It's not fair," Daisy groaned, clutching at her face. "Mother's making me wear the dress she wore to her tithe. It's ghastly, all sleeves and ribbons and—" She began moving her hands around her shoulders, as though she didn't have the words to explain exactly what was wrong with her mother's dress. "I suppose your father can get you anything you ask for," Daisy said longingly, still not looking away from the dress. "I suppose if you wanted an actual fey gown, he could probably source it for you." Ava's brow furrowed. She clearly hadn't considered that. "The beast won't want someone in an actual fey gown," she asserted, although she began tugging nervously at one of her curls. "If he wanted a fey female, he could find one in any of the fey courts, couldn't he? But he doesn't. He comes here, to Rosehill, looking for a human bride." A bride? I couldn't keep in a snort at that. All four girls whirled to stare at me. I hastily turned the snort into a cough, raising my fist to my mouth. "Hello, Elined, Daisy, Marcia." "Aveline," Elined said in a cool voice. "You didn't mention your sister was joining us today." There was a long pause. "Well, she's a gardener," Ava said reluctantly. "She knows about flowers, doesn't she?" Elined regarded me with more interest. "Of course." She glanced between me and the crown of roses sitting on Ava's dressing table. "What flowers will you be wearing tomorrow, Aster?"
"I'm wearing peonies,"
Marcia said quickly.
"What do you think of peonies?" "And I'm wearing daisies."
Daisy flushed. "Mother said it would be silly not to, but do you think those are too common for the beast?" I sucked in a breath and drew myself up straighter. My sister referring to me as a gardener stung. I was a greenwitch, and she knew it. But if I had any chance of getting through to the other girls, it was now, while all of their attention was firmly directed at me. "Listen," I said, hiding my irritation at her words and adopting a matter-of-fact tone. "It doesn't matter what flowers you think the beast will like. You ought to pray he hates what you've chosen, what you look like, that he doesn't pick you." I tried to meet Ava's eyes, but she studiously avoided my gaze. "The Fae are dangerous." "Oh, ignore her!" Ava hurried forward, digging her fingers into my arm in warning to stop embarrassing her in front of her friends. "Just because she's more interested in flowers than Fae lords." She turned to me. "You talk about him like he's an actual beast and not Fae nobility." My lips pressed together. He was both. The Fae of the forest had been our enemy for as long as Rosehill had existed. The tithe was a punishment, not an honour. "Just imagine what it would be like to be chosen," Elinette walked to Ava's bookcase, running her fingers along the spines of the fae tales lining the shelves. The stories say the court...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?